Section 35 of Select Sermons of Jonathan Edwards. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Magdalena Cook. Select Sermons of Jonathan Edwards. Section 35. Pardon for the greatest sinners. Psalm 25:11. For thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. It is evident by some passages in this psalm that when it was penned it was a time of affliction and danger with David. This appears particularly by the 15th and following verses. Mine eyes are ever towards the Lord, for he shall pluck my feet out of the net, etc. His distress makes him think of his sins, and leads him to confess them and to cry to God for pardon, as is suitable in a time of affliction. See verse 7. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. And verse 18. Look upon mine affliction and my pain, and forgive all my sins. It is observable in the text what arguments the psalmist makes use of in pleading for pardon. 1. He pleads for pardon for God's name's sake. He has no expectation of pardon for the sake of any righteousness or worthiness of his own for any good deeds he had done, or any compensation he had made for his sins. Though if man's righteousness could be a just plea, David would have had as much to plead as most. But he begs that God would do it for his own name's sake, for his own glory, for the glory of his own free grace, and for the honour of his own covenant faithfulness. 2. The psalmist pleads the greatness of his sins as an argument for mercy. He not only doth not plead his own righteousness, or the smallness of his sins, he not only doth not say, Pardon mine iniquity, for I have done much good to counterbalance it, or pardon my iniquity, for it is small, and thou hast no great reason to be angry with me. Mine iniquity is not so great, that thou hast any just cause to remember it against me. Mine offence is not such but that thou mayest well enough overlook it. But on the contrary, he says, Pardon my iniquity, for it is great. He pleads the greatness of his sin, and not the smallness of it. This enforces his prayer with this consideration, that his sins are very heinous. But how could he make this plea for a pardon? I answer, because the greater his iniquity, the more need he had of pardon. It is as much as if he had said, Pardon mine iniquity, for it is so great that I cannot bear the punishment. My sin is so great that I am in necessity of pardon. My case will be exceedingly miserable, unless thou be pleased to pardon me. He makes use of the greatness of his sin, to enforce his plea for pardon, as a man would make use of the greatness of calamity in begging for relief. When a beggar begs for bread, he will plead the greatness of his poverty and necessity. When a man in distress cries for pity, what more suitable plea can be urged than the extremity of his case? And God allows such a plea as this, for he is moved to mercy towards us by nothing in us but the miserableness of our case. He doth not pity sinners because they are worthy, but because they need his pity. Doctrine. If we truly come to God for mercy, the greatness of our sin will be no impediment to pardon. If it were an impediment, David would never have used it as a plea for pardon, and as we find he does in the text. The following things are needful in order that we truly come to God for mercy. 1. That we should see our misery, and be sensible of our need of mercy. They who are not sensible of their misery cannot truly look to God for mercy, for it is the very notion of divine mercy, that it is the goodness and grace of God to the miserable. Without misery in the object, there can be no exercise of mercy. To suppose mercy without supposing misery, or pity without calamity, is a contradiction. Therefore, men cannot look upon themselves as proper objects of mercy, unless they first know themselves to be miserable. And so, unless this be the case, it is impossible that they should come to God for mercy. They must be sensible that they are the children of wrath, that the law is against them, and that they are exposed to the curse of it, that the wrath of God abideth on them, and that he is angry with them every day while they are under the guilt of sin. They must be sensible that it is a very dreadful thing to be the object of wrath of God, that it is a very awful thing to have him for their enemy, and that they cannot bear his wrath. They must be sensible that the guilt of sin makes them miserable creatures, whatever temporal enjoyments they have, that they can be no other than miserable, undone creatures, so long as God is angry with them, that they are without strength and must perish, and that eternally, unless God help them. They must see that their case is utterly desperate for anything anyone else can do for them, that they hang over the pit of eternal misery, and that they must necessarily drop into it if God have not mercy on them. Part 2. They must be sensible that they are not worthy, that God should have mercy on them. They who truly come to God for mercy come as beggars, and not as creditors. They come for mere mercy, for sovereign grace, and not for anything that is due. Therefore they must see that the misery under which they lie is justly brought upon them, and that the wrath to which they are exposed is justly threatened against them, and that they have deserved that God should be their enemy, and should continue to be their enemy. They must be sensible that it would be just with God to do as he hath threatened in his holy law, viz., make them the objects of his wrath, and curse in hell to all eternity. They who come to God for mercy in a right manner are not disposed to find fault with his severity, but they come in a sense of their own utter unworthiness, as with ropes about their necks, and lying in the dust at the foot of mercy. Part 3. They must come to God for mercy in and through Jesus Christ alone. All their hope of mercy must be from the consideration of what he is, what he hath done, and what he hath suffered, and that there is no other name given under heaven among men whereby we can be saved but that of Christ, that he is the Son of God, and the Saviour of the world, that his blood cleanses from all sin, and that he is so worthy, that all sinners who are in him may well be pardoned and accepted. It is impossible that any should come to God for mercy, and at the same time have no hope of mercy. Their coming to God for it implies that they have some hope of obtaining, otherwise they would not think it worth the while to come. But they that come in a right manner have all their hope through Christ, or from the consideration of his redemption, and the sufficiency of it. If persons thus come to God for mercy, the greatness of their sins will be no impediment to pardon. Let their sins be ever so many, and great, and aggravated, it will not make God in the least degree more backward to pardon them. This may be made evident by the following considerations. 1. The mercy of God is as sufficient for the pardon of the greatest sins as for the least, and that because his mercy is infinite. That which is infinite is as much above what is great as it is above what is small. Thus, God being infinitely great, he is as much above kings as he is above beggars. He is as much above the highest angel as he is above the meanest worm. One finite measure doth not come any nearer to the extent of what is infinite than another. So the mercy of God being infinite, it must be as sufficient for the pardon of all sin as of one. If one of the least sins be not beyond the mercy of God, so neither are the greatest, or 10,000 of them. However, it must be acknowledged that this alone doth not prove the doctrine. For though the mercy of God may be as sufficient for the pardon of great sins as others, yet there may be other obstacles, besides the want of mercy. The mercy of God may be sufficient, and yet the other attributes may oppose the dispensation of mercy in these cases. Therefore I observe. 2. That the satisfaction of Christ is as sufficient for the removal of the greatest guilt as the least. 1 John 1:7. The blood of Christ cleanseth from all sin. Acts 13:39. By him all that believe are justified from all things from which ye could not be justified by the law of Moses. All the sins of those who truly come to God for mercy, let them be what they will, are satisfied for. If God be true who tells us so, and if they be satisfied for, surely it is not incredible that God should be ready to pardon them. So that Christ having fully satisfied for all sin, and having wrought out a satisfaction that is sufficient for all, it is now no way inconsistent with the glory of the divine attributes to pardon the greatest sins of those who in a right manner come unto him for it. God may now pardon the greatest sinners without any prejudice to the honour of his holiness. The holiness of God will not suffer him to give the least countenance to sin, but inclines him to give proper testimonies of his hatred of it. But Christ having satisfied for sin, God can now love the sinner